Welcome to an episode of Theological Sidebars. Good to be back in the chair. Hey, I was going to do this video last week, but now it's a little more timely. I'm going to delve into a little bit of the political, or at least comment on something political. There's an article I found last week that now this is not just the from the primary, but now this is the Democrat candidate for Senate in Texas. Senate candidate James Tallarico claims that abortion, gay marriage aren't mentioned in the Bible. So I wanted to go through this article and point out a couple things, talk about it. This is a guy who is making a splash because he is a seminary student as well, as also has worked in government in Texas, but now is the candidate, but made a splash more recently that when he was being interviewed, saying that the Bible doesn't say anything about Jesus in particular, doesn't say anything about abortion or gay marriage. This was him on Colbert Show when he was going through it, so you can listen to that if you'd like to. But really just says, and I'll give some of the quotes here from the article, and then I'll dive into some of the stuff I want to talk about. He says, Jesus in Matthew 25 tells us exactly how you and I and every one of our fellow believers and how we're going to be judged and how we're going to be saved. By feeding the hungry, by healing the sick, by welcoming the stranger. And then he goes on to say nothing about going to church, nothing about voting Republican. It's all about how you treat other people. And so he talks about the right essentially co-opting Christianity, and it's not real Christianity, and that his is this kind of everything boils down to love others, love God. He talks about, as he goes a little bit more, he says a lot of fellow Christians and a lot of our fellow Christians that the most important issues were abortion and gay marriage, two issues that aren't mentioned in the Bible, two issues that Jesus never talked about. So that's something I'd like to engage on in just a moment. And then one other thing that he talks about, he's at a seminary, part of a Presbyterian Church USA, and just says Jesus gave us two commandments: love God and love our neighbor. And so look, here's the deal. Let me stop and just talk about this. The reason I want to talk about this is because it's a very popular kind of more liberal Christianity that's out there. And I will say, just as a fair warning, to our churches and to our people who try to boil everything down, we put it in our mission statement: love God, love others. Look, I get that we're using words that Jesus has said, and actually I want to go to that passage. But largely these things have taken over, and actually love God, love others is really cutting out a big chunks of what was said here. That's a synopsis of something much bigger that is behind in this passage, but that's been co-opted. And essentially what has happened with that is, this love God, love others is kind of love God, whatever that means, and then love others, which is kind of this umbrella of all things, all people, which I find ironic. When you actually read the article, listen to the interview, there's kind of this like love for all people except those, truly, backwards, fake Christians who are on the right, essentially. Those people, we got to deal with those people, right? But everybody else. Okay, so let me start with the first thing he says. Jesus never mentioned it. This is a popular argument that people like to put out sometimes. They'll say, well, Jesus never mentioned this, so therefore it's not a big deal. No, I'm sorry. That's not true. A couple things we need to think about. As a Christian, one, we have the whole Bible, and it's theology that we pull from. And so we don't just cut out, there's a reason why Christians don't just sit with red letters and just a few pages of just red letters, right? But that's for often people try to make an argument as if it weren't in the little red letter section, it has nothing for us. That's not true at all. Jesus actually taught often about the use of the Scriptures, the importance of the Scriptures. He will even say things like, in Matthew 22, in fact, the same passage, the same chapter that we're going to deal with, another section that he says in Matthew 22, verse 29, you're mistaken because you don't know the power of the Scriptures or the power of God. right? He's hammering them often, right? And this guy too, I've seen him in his speech, and before he'll say, it's another pop thing to say, Jesus only was against the religious people, as if like that Jesus only had a problem with people who were religious. That's not true. Jesus was against those who were propping themselves up and focused on the traditions and not what the word says. That was a big deal. If you go back and read Matthew, a lot of the time what's happening is there is this over focus on tradition and not the word. And so Jesus will call them out. You have heard it said, but I tell you. That's often what he's doing. He's having to correct what the scriptures actually say, and not what they believe or they interpreted based on their tradition. So that's a key thing, right? That we have the whole Bible. Jesus made it very clear that we are to use the whole Bible for our theology. And by the way, I've heard this used with people today too. Like, this is something you should not do, and it should be a red flag when people say, "Well, I like what Jesus said, but Paul, he's just hardcore. I don't really like Paul." I'm sorry, you don't get to pick and choose who you like. That's not Christianity as well. But I'll go back to this idea. Okay, so Jesus says we use the whole Bible, that we should use the whole Bible. But then they'll say things like, well, Jesus never mentioned this. Wouldn't these be a big deal? And I've heard this saying that I like the argument of silence, right? Like, because they don't mention these topics, therefore they're not big deals. You have to think about the context in which Jesus is walking into Israel. So, by the way, I'm going to go on a limb here. I did study history in college, but I'm going to go on a limb here and just say, in the event that I'm not up to date with recent findings, gay marriage was not necessarily a big deal in Israel at that time. Abortion was not really a big deal at that time. These were not cultural issues. Now, let's just say this. If you read the Torah, there's a lot that will be said on homosexual relationships. There's a lot to be said on offering your children to pass through the fire, as they would say in the Torah. And that idea of very similar reason, they would just do it outside the womb. After the baby came out, then you get rid of the baby because then you are going to be promised all that what the gods would give you. And so those are very real things that you can say, okay, but the Bible speaks on pieces of this, and so therefore it's a serious thing. You can't just say, well, Jesus never mentioned that. Well, other places do mention that. Paul will mention things on sexual morality and sexual immorality, right? So those are all things that the Bible has a lot to say on. And so it's not a fair assessment to say Jesus never mentioned these. Jesus was speaking to very specific things that were coming up and that were rising, and very focused on the arrival of the kingdom, but not meant to just say, never was there ever meant to be this understanding of let's just cut everything down and just do some red letters. That's not what Jesus taught at all. And when you do that, you are essentially cutting out, and which the Bible condemns. Revelation talks about that. Don't cut away. Deuteronomy talks about it as well. Now, here's the other thing. I want to go back to this idea of the loving God, loving others thing. I said earlier, you can make it say whatever you want it to say, but let me go back and let me just open up a passage, and let's look at this passage, right? Because this is where it comes from, of like, how is it that everything boils down to love God, love others? So they're testing him, and they said, "Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest?" And he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands." So what is he saying here? He's saying that you can essentially boil down everything to love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself out of the commands. That all these commands come down to right practice before God, what it means to love God, and right practice, what it means to love your neighbor. That's what they boil down to. Now, here's the problem. Culturally today, we take love and we mean what we want to mean love. Love is completely undefinable today. We say, what is love? Well, love is what people say. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Let's go to some passages here and let's see. So what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind? Well, that's a quotation from Deuteronomy 6. And this is from the Shema, talking about who is, listen, Israel, love the Lord God The Lord your God, the Lord is one. Let me stop for just a second. So key to understanding how to love God is to know who he is truly. So we love God by having an accurate view of who God is. That's important. Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. How do you do that? Well, what does he say? These words I'm giving you are to be on your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates. And so this is the idea, is the things that he has taught them, the laws, the commands. Those are something to surely show God that you love him, is you keep his word, that you obey his word, that you teach them, they pass them down. It's not this, oh, I'm just out there and I just love God. That's not what the Torah says at all. In fact, some have speculated, and I think you'd make good case for this, that the Ten Commandments are this way, where the first set are about my relationship to God, and the last section are about how my relationship plays out with each other. And that's a really great way to think about this as well. I can come back to that in just a moment. But notice that this right relationship with God means his commands, that you know who he is, and then you keep them and you pass them down. It's not this just like sit there and think about how much you love him, but that you keep him and you keep his commands. If you just go further in the context, right? Fear the Lord, worship him, take your oath to name. Don't follow the gods or the gods of the other peoples, right? So you don't just do that. Notice what else. If you start to follow other ones, right? If you don't carefully observe, he's going to get rid of you. Carefully observe the commands of the Lord, your God, the decrees and statutes he's commanded you. Do what is right and good in the Lord's sight, so you may prosper, may enter and possess the good land the Lord your God swore to give your ancestors. So this is important. That all of this was meant to say, the way I love God is I show him, right, by living for him. I keep his command. I try to live for him. That's the first thing of what that truly means. It doesn't just mean, oh, I love God. People say that all the time. I used to have bands that I would listen to, and they had the trashiest lyrics and the worst things you could say, but they say, oh, I thank God and love God for all that he's given me. You don't love him. That's not what it really means. It's just go live how you want and do what you want to do. Let me give you another one. Okay, in this command. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Where does that come from? It comes from the book of Leviticus. It looks right here. Let's go to this passage. Do not take revenge or bear a grudge against members of the community, but love your neighbor as yourself. Right? This is the idea that I am trying to seek the best that I can for my neighbor. What does that actually mean? That you don't just get to choose and decide what that means of how you love your neighbor. That's what we do, right? Is we just kind of say, well, I think it's loving if I do this. No, let's go back to some ways that we see. It has to be, loving your neighbor has to be rooted in, right? Loving your neighbor has to be rooted in the law. It needs to be rooted in the commands. Because otherwise, I just make it all up. So I'll give you a couple things. Look at the 10 Commandments really quickly. So God says, don't have other gods before me. Don't make any idols. Don't misuse his name. Remember the Sabbath. All of those are to focus on God, right relationship. Those are things for him that help you stay grounded on who he is. You set apart your week. You honor him. All those things. Notice these other things. Here's how you love your neighbor. Honor your father and your mother. For children, if you're in the home, this is how you honor. You love your father and mother. You honor them. Okay, how about this? Don't murder. That's a pretty good one. So I'm not going to kill my neighbor. I'm not going to commit adultery. A lot of people say, well, I'm just following my heart. I'm loving my neighbor. No, I'm sorry, you're not doing it. You're not going to steal from your neighbor. You're not going to give false testimony against your neighbor. You're not going to covet your neighbor. So all of those are things that essentially are teaching you how do you live amongst each other. But it doesn't just stay with that. The rest of the Torah fleshes out. Okay, there's that, but there's a lot of unique situations that will then tell you, here's how you are to live. Now, by the way, all of that language of love your neighbor as yourself also is couched within the same thing of don't be like the other nations. Don't do this. Push it out. You can't have that in your territory. You should not live like the nations around you. So there is this awareness that you are not to live a certain way. There's a calling out of this will not happen in our land, in our territory. So you can't just take the words of Jesus where he says all of it hinges together and just say, Jesus is not just snipping them out and saying, let me just boil down to two things, make it up how you want to go. The idea of loving God comes from correct understanding as he's revealed in the scriptures. idea of loving the neighbor comes from a correct understanding of how do I love my neighbor based on what the scriptures tell me, not by what I think. And I think the loving your neighbor thing has just gotten blown up. I've done this with Dr. Andrew Marquez. We've talked a lot about that. That has just become the stamp to I'm going to do whatever I think I like and then do it for other people. It's not rooted in what does it mean to truly love your neighbor from the biblical standpoint. And so it's more of a permissive do as you wilt, do as thou wilt. That's kind of the, and then just say it's, that's kind of like, I think isn't that the satanic mantra, do as thou wilt? And I think that we slap on, oh yeah, I'm loving my neighbor. That's how I'm going to do it. So I get frustrated when people try to boil down, Christianity into this, and they pretend that they're not being political with it, but they are. And what they've done is they've created this new brand, which cuts out everything out of context, and make it say what you wanted to make it say. You can make anything say what you want to say. All right. You can take any words and make it say what you want to say. But is that what the context really leads to? Is that what really how Jesus taught? And I'll say this. Here's something I've been thinking about this. I'm going to be preaching on a section coming up in the Gospel of Matthew. It's easy to say, oh, Jesus was against all the religious people. But you know what? You know who were super religious people that Jesus had hang out and had a lot of affection for? John the Baptist crew. John the Baptist crew were the people calling out. John the Baptist telling everybody to repent. John the Baptist calling out the Herod and losing his head for it. Those people gravitated to Jesus, and you don't see Jesus saying, no, none of you religious people. No, Jesus, who did he call out, are the self-righteous ones, the ones who thought that because of their traditions, the things that they did, that they were right. He didn't have a problem with religious people. He had a problem with people who were unwilling to actually have this conversation about what the scriptures say, who trusted in their own works. That's not a problem, but often it's the popular way to do it. So I would, when you hear things like this from the right and the left, but especially this dude, as you see it come out of the left, where you try to boil everything down, go deeper. What does that context actually say? What does it actually mean? But I would be skeptical of any time somebody tries to tell you Jesus never said this, or the Bible. This is what we should focus on. Like, okay, push a little bit further, go a little deeper. What does it actually say? All right, I hope this is helpful to kind of process some of this stuff. I hope that you can look a little bit more. I know I didn't touch much on the abortion issue because we've talked about this enough. I mean, you can read things like Psalm 139 and you see that, that God has created life and that it says that he knew us in the womb, all of that. So I think it's crazy for anybody to say that you can have a biblical position on that. They never mentioned it. It's in the scriptures that life is precious to God, right? You'll see other places. What is man that you look at him, right? This is all important to God. So we don't have the ability to just say we choose what life is and isn't important to God. But I hope you think through these things. Really, I want to hit is the root of that argument, of those things of Jesus never said this or anything like that. And so if you've heard those before, let me know what you think. And but let's talk. I appreciate you listening. Take care. Bye-bye.